I've had an opportunity to be a leader in all of the different an awesome opportunity to become the director of early childhood education at our only PBI here in the state of Indiana. And then after that, I had a wonderful opportunity. I was putting on some early childhood education lunch and learns for other directors and leaders in the ECE field, and had someone offer me a position at the state. And so I will say that my journey was a very blessed one, as I had the opportunity to interact with several different leaders and leadership styles. And I believe that that helped me to decide what type of leader I wanted to be in this field. I also started incrementally as it relates to my education. And so I started off taking courses at the local technical college, and then went into my CDA, then my associate's degree, my bachelor's, my master's, and now I'm working on my EDS. And so throughout that entire journey, I had the help of mentors that I've had for several years, mentors from my associate's degree program, as a matter of fact, and my educational journey. And so I would say that it's okay to start incrementally. It's okay to not know exactly what you want to do in this field, because there are several options and avenues that you can take in this field, and you don't have to know everything all at once, but just try to find a mentor, someone who is maybe where you want to be, that can help you along your way.
Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Boyd, could you talk a bit about what your pathway has been and what issues are important to you?
Sure, and thanks for having me today. I'm in Institute of Higher Education, so I'll talk about the leadership positions that I've really occupied in that space. So during my time in academia, I occupied 2 leadership positions. The first as Associate Chair for Research in the Department of Health Sciences in the School of Medicine at UNC Chapel Hill. And the second as the Director of the Juniper Gardens Children's Project at the University of Kansas. And some of you may be familiar with Juniper Gardens. It's known for the research around the 30 million word gap, so that children in poverty hear 30 million fewer words by the time they're age 5 than children from higher income households. But I ended up in those 2 different leadership positions for different reasons. For the first position, where I was Associate Chair of Research, someone recognized leadership potential in me and provided me an opportunity, and it was my mentor. So up until that point in my career, I had really never envisioned myself being in a leadership position. So sometimes people see potential in you that you don't necessarily see in yourself, and you have to sort of decide if it's an opportunity you want to take advantage of. For the second position, when I became Director of Juniper Gardens, that's a position that I really personally decided to step into, because I felt there were too few faces of color that led some of these prominent university-based child development research centers around the country. Yet a lot of the work and research that was happening in those places was focused on Black and Brown children. And so I felt the need to really help diversify the field. That's to some degree the issue I've been trying to address through my research and my own career, is how do we put people of color in leadership positions, in particular when the work happening at those places is focused on children and families of color. So that's sort of the reasons I got into leadership and my sort of pathway into leadership. Opportunities being and doors being open for me, but then also making some conscious decisions to step into leadership roles that where I feel that diversity is important.
Thank you for sharing. And Margo, you work at a local school district. Could you tell us about your journey? What issues have been important to you, and what change have you wanted to see, in your pathway?
Yes, so thank you for this opportunity to join today, definitely. And in the words of Lady McNair from the Sister Circle, hear me and hear me clearly. I did not plan to go into public school education. That was not my goal as an early childhood educator, and passionate about early childhood, but here I am, right? So my journey is a little unique. Reality is I started out in nonprofit, and as you know, nonprofit and community-based is not fully funded, right? Funding is an issue. And I was young, became a single mom, and I needed benefits and consistency. So that's how I ended up in public school. Here I am. That is my story, right? But in true transparency, my journey began as a child. I had a great aunt who was an educator, and I got to visit her table, her thematic table every month, and get to take something off of it, right? Children love to go to the treasure box, right? So that was my idea of going to the treasure box. Every month I got to visit her, and she was an educator. So she asked those questions and challenged me and allowed me to engage. And then I started out in nonprofit, like I mentioned before, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I enjoyed it because nonprofit focuses on the impact usually, right? Community-based, they have focuses that are, they want to make impact. They build relationships. That's where my passion was, those family engagement and partnership opportunities with different agencies coming together. Just talking about it warms my heart, right? But then, like I said, I ended up in public school, and my goal became, why can't we have and in public school? Why can't we focus on data and the impact, create this impact? So that's my goal, being in leadership in a public school setting, is to have and impact, those relationships, focusing on those things that we know are foundational for early childhood, and collecting that data to continue to gain funding and hopefully connect partnerships with those community-based, those home-based, those different early childhood avenues that we have within us, within our field, should I say.
Thank you so much. And it's really exciting to have the three of you here today. It's a great opportunity for us to hear and learn from you. We've had our panelists just do a brief introduction of, kind of their pathway so far. Dr. Floyd had a great suggestion. If folks who are participants, if you want to put in the chat where you're joining us from, and we can, see the whole picture here today. So we really want to learn, so I want to talk about what seems to be critical when becoming a leader. And I think each of you mentioned this in talking about your pathways. Networking, mentorship, and coaching can really make a difference. So I want to ask each of you to elaborate a bit more on how specifically you experienced that mentorship, networking, coaching, and how it worked for you. And we'll start with Dr. Boyd, and then we'll go around.
Sure, happy to start. I think the first thing to recognize, right, is that leadership positions really are unique and different positions within an organization. I attended this semester-long leadership training, and at the end of the training, the organizer said, "There's not one way to lead." And I was like, well, you could have saved me an entire semester of attending the training if you just started with that. But I think it's true. I think good leadership comes in a variety of forms. And what characteristics make a good leader for one organization may not be a good leader, may not be the characteristics that make a good leader for another organization. And there are different leadership styles and leadership models. For example, servant leadership is a big one people are talking about right now. I think for my own personal journey, what I found most helpful is really on-the-job support and mentorship. I really established a network of people who were already in leadership positions that I would ask questions of. I would go have coffee with people. I would send emails just to seek their guidance and wisdom around how you sort of navigate sort of certain situations. I also had a sort of separate network, if you will, of leaders of color. Because I was occupying a leadership position in predominantly white institutions. And I wanted to talk to them about how they had navigated some of those spaces and what they had found most helpful. So you have to think about, given the leadership position you are in or about to occupy, what network or what group of people would be most helpful for you to help you navigate that space. So I really sort of sought out people that I trusted and just really asked their advice. And that's what I found most helpful for my own personal journey.
Thank you. Margo, could you share?
Yeah, sure. Dr. Boyd said some powerful things. Leadership is not just someone who is considered a boss or whatever. You know, I was a leader when I was a childcare frontline worker, right? Especially during the pandemic, right? Like, those are leaders. They're advocating for our children, right? So leadership does look different in every arena, but those who are in school, they're leaders, right? Those who are striving to be early childhood educators and professionals, they are leaders. Networking is so important. It actually led me to my mentors and coach that I have right now. So I think networking is so important. And networking looks different, right? So just like you have to have a voting plan, I hope everyone is voting, you have to have a networking plan too, right? And part of my networking plan was inboxing on LinkedIn, right? Connecting on social media. Part of my networking plan is attending conferences, applying to speak at conferences when you get to that level, right? But just attending is important and a networking opportunity as well. But then engage in those organizations. I'm a part of NAEYC, right? And that's just one. I'm a part of Black Child Development. I'm a part of, you know, different things that focus on early childhood. For me, it's really important to engage with those who have passions that you have, right? So for as far as mentorship, NCAEYC, which is the North Carolina affiliate of NAEYC, has an equity circle. And I gained 3 mentors by attending just one time. We affectionately call them the founders. Dr. Valerie McMillan, I hope you've heard these names before, because in my brain, they're powerful people and amazing. Dr. Valerie McMillan, Miss Angela Wilson, and Dr. Brenda Williamson. These are ladies who we call the founders. We affectionately call them the founders of the Equity Circle, but they're my mentors now. They encourage me. I showed up vulnerable at a session and was like, why can't I find a position to lead? I felt like I was stuck in the classroom. And I had an amazing principal share with me one time. She wasn't my principal, but I was asking her, you know, how do I become a leader? And she spoke with me candidly and said, maybe if you straighten your hair or you wear smaller earrings, right? And she was coming to me because that happened to her from a place of experience, right? I was determined to show up as my authentic self in every arena, right? I love my big earrings. I love my natural hair. It's tied down right now, but usually I have, you know, big hair sometimes, right? So those opportunities, I showed up vulnerable in this space at NCAEYC Equity Circle, and these 3 ladies took me under, and then we like to affectionately, they stretch me, right? They stretch me to these opportunities. But if I had not been a member of NCAEYC and got the email about the Equity Circle, then I would not have met this mentor, right? If I would not have inboxed Ariel Ford, who is now the director of DCDEE. I said, hey, cuz, because we had the same Ford last name. I have something catchy, right? I just wanted to make a connection with her. I wanted to talk to her. I wanted to speak up and speak out for early childhood educators in my area. And guess what? I feel like we're best friends now, but I'm able to have constant communication with her. And something else is, I attended, what is it called? The Equity Institute. Can't think of the name right now. Racial Equity Institute if you ever get a chance to attend something like that, attend their trainings, definitely, I encourage you to. It changes your mind. It gives you more information. Guess what? It encourages you to read books. Those are important. Someone was speaking about leadership books. These are two of my favorite, Graceful Leadership and Doing the Right Thing. Anne Terrell, she's, and Mari Sykes. So I just wanted to share those with some books ideas. That's a little bit about mentorship. Networking is important, and coaching, right?
Yes, thank you so much. Angelina, can you share a bit about your perspective on this?
Sure. So I could say ditto to both what Dr. Boyd and what Ms. Crosby shared, because it's so important. I think knowing the type of leader, I kind of led into that a little earlier, is, you have an opportunity in life to come across really great leaders. And then sometimes, unfortunately, you come across leaders that are not so great. And so taking that information in and deciding what type of leader I wanted to be was something that I had to sit back and think about, because it's a big step. It's a lot of responsibility to be a leader. And so I just wanted to share that, is that I think you have to re-examine your why you are doing what you're doing, and then knowing what type of leader you want to be, and always be willing to evolve. I think that knowing that you will always, if you always try to evolve, then you are considering yourself a lifelong learner. This field is growing with research. You can never know too much about this field. And so just knowing your why and what type of leader you want to be, I think, is very important. And then I also feel that part of leadership is fostering a sense of belonging, not being afraid to have difficult conversations, and then creating equitable practices. And so thinking about that and keeping that in mind is something that some of the mentors that I've run across have taught me. And I shared, I've got 2 mentors that have been with me since I started my associate's degree program. And I tell you what, I was a knucklehead when I was early in my educational journey. We had 6 children. I was still in the Indiana National Guard. So my husband was in the Guard. And so we were a very busy family and trying to go to school. And so I was that one that was just like, excuse me, professor, can I turn this in? I promise I'll have this in. I just give me one more day, And then now that I adjunct, for a community college, the same college that my 2 mentors come from, as a matter of fact, I understand, and I try to be that mentor to a lot of my students. They still reach out to me as they're trying to make decisions about jobs that they want to go into. And so having a really good mentor, to me, I feel has helped me to become, a good mentor, a mentor that is going to sit back and ask you some of those hard questions, help you self-reflect, because self-reflection is key to anything that we do in this field, and anything really that we take on in life. And so I just wanted to make sure that I pointed out those in combination with what Dr. Boyd and Ms. Crosby shared, that, being a lifelong learner, knowing your why and what type of leader you really want to be, and then trying to be that mentor that you wish you had, or that you do currently have, and, bring to the table those 3 things that I mentioned about fostering a sense of belonging, being able to have sometimes those difficult conversations, and then just involve yourself in creating equitable practices.
Thank you. And that's a really good segue to the next question. We really want to learn about your perspectives on leadership, and also how our field can become more equitable. So we can start with Angelina again. What do you think needs to be done to provide equitable conditions across the field?
Oh, sure, great. So I will share that I had an amazing opportunity to come across a really good read. So this brief was developed by the Early Years Leadership Diversity Initiative, and it's called Diversify Early Childhood Leadership. That brief changed my mindset on a lot of different things. And when I was the director of early childhood at Martin University, we created our ECE Lunch and Learns around that. And the reason why is because they talked about barriers to diverse leadership. And so I just want to share with you what those 3 things were. The first one was unclear, unspoken rules. And so how sometimes, the dominant culture can sometimes put practices into place that may not be equitable for everyone involved, people that are trying to enter into the field and people that are trying to get their footing as far as being a new leader, someone that is fresh out the gates, trying to lead the best that they can, that need that support. Sometimes they don't have that. The second thing was that there is a lack of mentors. Sometimes we in this field get into a place where we've gotten what we can get, and instead of reaching out and helping that next person up, we tend to just hold on to it instead of being that mentor or that helper. And so that's something that they identified that I firmly believe in and agree with. And then that last thing is gatekeepers of process. So sometimes just depending on whether or not they want to boost someone's career, or they can be that person being that gatekeeper that can hinder others from moving forward as a leader. And so I wanted to share that information because it was very impactful. As a matter of fact, one of the ladies that was responsible, her name is Miss Meredith. She is part of the Maryland group, if I'm not mistaken, and she introduced me to Dr. Graf Wallner, and so really appreciated that. But I wanted to share that because those are 3 things that I feel that if we can address those, then the diversity in leadership in this field could get a lot better and be more inclusive.
Absolutely, thank you. And thank you everybody for putting those links in the chat. I know everybody really appreciates that. Dr. Boyd, could you talk about where you see inclusion and diversity being addressed for teachers in special education?
Good question. I guess my first short answer is that it's not being addressed enough. I think in part it's stressed in pre-service education, and so as part of preparation for becoming a teacher, it's certainly addressed in in-service education. And once teachers are out in the field, sort of attending some of the seminars and sort of trainings on issues of racial equity and diversity. I think the other part of that is we have to recognize where we are right now as a country, that we are seeing, I think, an inevitable backlash to addressing issues of equity and diversity, in particular in public school settings. And we know that with almost all civil rights progress, that there is some backlash to that. So I think it's important that we recognize the moment we're in. We should continue to persevere because it's important for the outcomes of children that we continue to try to move forward, even though we're seeing this backlash. I think the particular issue in special education is that teachers hear a lot about inclusion. So making sure students with disabilities get access to the general education curriculum, or that they're served in their least restrictive environment. But they don't hear enough about issues of intersectionality. So how issues of race and disability in particular impact students of color with disabilities. So we know that sometimes within the early intervention system, we may see actual underrepresentation of students of color. So they're not getting the supports and services they need early in life to really achieve optimal outcomes. But then when we get into the public school system, we sometimes see overrepresentation of students of color in special education placements, in particular in segregated classroom placements. And we get into discussions of sort of school to prison pipeline issues, or what does it mean to be tracked into special education, and what does that mean for students' outcomes? So I think where we are not doing enough of a service to teachers is we aren't helping them to recognize inequities that are embedded in the system, right? That inequity is often systems driven and related to structures that are in place. And so helping teachers not only to understand issues of inclusion and the importance of that, but issues of intersectionality and what are the challenges with the special education system itself that are perhaps pigeonholing students and affecting really long-term outcomes for them. So there's certainly lots of spaces where we can do better. And certainly, I don't think we're doing enough. We're, irrespective of the backlash we're hearing right now, we certainly know just from data and outcomes that there are inequities. And so we should be doing all we can to address them and overcome them. So.
Thank you. My next question is, this one's for Margo. You've taught at an HBCU. Could you talk about how this shaped your perspective on access to high quality learning for young children?
Oh, you're speaking that into existence. I have not taught at an HBCU, but I did attend at HBCU.
Yes, I'm sorry. I misread that.
It's okay. Speaking into existence, right? That's a goal. I'm an adjunct instructor at a community college, but it's on my vision board to maybe go back to Winston-Salem State University, which is the HBCU that I attended and love. Yep, I have my RAM earrings on, if you can see. So I am a RAM alumni. Winston-Salem State University is the HBCU that I attended. And what did I gain from that experience? Let's see, everything, right? It was part of my journey. Definitely part of my journey to attend something Ms. Williams said earlier. I said, did she read my notes? Because our motto is enter to learn, depart to serve at Winston-Salem State University. And we enter and we learn, okay? We build relationships. We learn how to network. The opportunities are amazing. My great aunt, who I used to visit her table, her treasure box every month, she attended TC. It was once called Teachers College. And then it became Winston-Salem State University. And yes, I see some RAM love in the chat, so thank you. Definitely, those opportunities created relationships. It's like you're building a community, and within community is unity. At an HBCU, it's the one opportunity. Dr. Boyd mentioned that he had to have like a separate group of mentors, you know, because of where he worked. At an HBCU, it's Black and brown everywhere. We're building this community. We're in uplifting each other. You know, we don't have to always be a teacher in the environment because we've all experienced those certain things. You know, as a Black woman in a predominantly white leadership arena, early childhood leaders, those who are in the leaders, are mostly white women. So me slowly maneuvering myself, I'm always having to teach and say, hold on, that's a microaggression. Let's talk about it. You know, when I'm at my HBCU and we get a dose of it at homecoming, every year we get re-energized at homecoming in those opportunities. But it's a foundation of love, of community, of so much. It's hard to actually put it into words, but you learn those things. You learn culturally responsive, to speak up when someone can't speak, right? And in early childhood, we often speak for those children who can't speak. Dr. Boyd mentioned inclusion. If you ask anyone that I work with right now, that's my push right now. We have NC PreK, and I'm passionate about making sure that those classrooms are inclusive, that we have opportunities for families and children. And now I need the district to somehow figure out how we can get some more funding and make sure we support these classrooms, right? But those opportunities at an HBCU help to shape my perspective with that culturally responsive and reflective opportunities. You get to lean back and say, you know, what's missing in public school? How do we create opportunities for early childhood educators that attend HBCUs to come into these arenas? Those types of things.
Thank you so much. I have one question for each of you, and then I think we'll have time to also answer questions that are coming in the chat too. So we'll go back to Ms. Williams. How important is it for a state agency to inform the field about social and emotional well-being for young learners, particularly after the pandemic?
Oh, it is one of our top priorities here in the state of Indiana. And so I'd say that it's crucial because a lot of the federal funding funnels through most state offices as it relates to the child care subsidies, as it relates to wellness programs. And so I can speak to our state specifically. We have just launched, we've launched a wellness program for early childhood educators. It's free to them, where they have EAP services. They can reach out, and not only them, but them and their families. So it reaches out to the children as well. We also have, it also makes more sense with a lot of the Build, Learn, Grow stabilization grants that got sent out, being able to use those funds to help develop initiatives that focus on tutoring, getting some of the children back to where they were by identifying certain social and emotional curriculums that they can use in the classroom to help them with that mental support so that they can then focus on their academics. And so we, you know, one of the things that I like to always bring up is just getting the state agencies. Sometimes it can become very political. And so getting some of the senators and the legislators to understand what developmentally appropriate practice is, and that certain things, even though families may want to see their children focus on academics, if they are not socially ready to be in school, then, you know, some of those other things are not going to be easy for them to learn. And so getting them to understand that helps, and being a state agency and having people in our office, which we're blessed to have. We have a lot of people that have early childhood education degrees in our office. And so I see that there is a push and a stand up to some of the pushback that we get from some of our legislators and from some of our politicians, and they're listening. They are truly listening, and it really helps that they have children as well. And so they also saw and have seen the results of what happened when the pandemic hit. And so they understand about those social and emotional pieces. And so being a state agency and having the opportunity to help push out those initiatives is very important. And it should be a focus of if not all state agencies.
Thank you so much. For Dr. Boyd, so this next question you've already touched on a bit, but so we know from research that inclusive practices for young learners, especially pre-K and K, is very beneficial, but we also know that not all public school districts are moving in that direction. What specifically can higher education do to reinforce those evidence-based inclusion practices?
That's a really good question. And I'm a researcher, so I'm a big believer in data and the use of data to inform practices. But I do think this is a conversation where we need to talk about data and science, but we also need to talk about it from a social justice and equity framework. This is also just an equity issue, that kids are getting differential access to inclusive placements and therefore differential experiences in school. And so the different access and that different experiences affects outcomes. And so we can look at the data. We know outcomes for kids who stay in special education versus those who are served in inclusion are different. We know future life outcomes and goals can be different as a result of that. So I'm a huge proponent of using data to drive decision-making in classrooms, but I also just think this is an issue where we cannot ignore inequities in the system, and that there are predominantly, we see for Black boys in particular, that they are much more likely to be pigeonholed into special education because their teachers are more likely to identify them as having problem behavior, that they're more likely to receive harsher consequences and penalties for the same infractions that their white peers may engage in. So there are lots of ways that kids can get misidentified and put into special education and don't get the benefits of an inclusive experience and inclusive education, because as children grow, peers become very fundamental and crucial to their outcomes. and who your peer group is. And so having positive peer models is really, really important. So I think this is just one of those issues where the merging of science and what we know about the benefits of inclusion and a good public education, and as was talked about, good high quality relationships, as Ms. Krause was talking about early on throughout schooling experiences, is really important. But that needs to be merged with social justice. It's just important from an equity standpoint that we ensure that kids are in the right placement for them. And for a lot of kids, that may be an inclusive placement, and we should be asking ourselves, why aren't some kids being given that opportunity to be in that particular placement? Why are we pushing some kids into special education who may not need it, or who may not need it for their entire schooling experience? And so how do we help best support kids? So I just think it's important that we merge these two things together. I'm a scientist by training. I do research, large scale quantitative research, but we cannot ignore that this is also an equity issue, and we should discuss it from both aspects. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Ms. Krause, we have a last question for you, and then we're going to go to some of our attendee questions. So we know that many of four-year-olds who were eligible didn't attend pre-K in the 20 to 21 school year because of everything being remote. How does your district support incoming pre-K students now to make sure that we're kind of closing those gaps in that experience prior to kindergarten?
That's a really great question. Something that I did at the end of last program year was created a survey, and it went out across the county. And Dr. Boyd, hopefully he'll pat me on the back for this, but collecting that data, right? Asking families what they need. And I think that's something that we lack often. That's what's wrong with the policies and procedures in practice. You haven't invited those who are affected by those policies, practices to the table. So my thought was, let's ask them what they need first. And, we provide the opportunity for them to tell us what they need. So when we were doing screenings, we provided the survey. What do you need? What would you like to see? What is your child lacking? What those questions, collecting that data so that then we can create a transition plan to allow them those opportunities and connecting those partnerships in the community. We were able to partner with Alamance-Burlington, and they have a program. They received a grant, and families receive text message. And I'm on the text. I don't have a young child. Our children are older. The youngest two are in high school now. But the text messages that we receive through this grant encourage parents to talk to your children during dinner time, or ask those, it's like questions every day, like ask your child what color did they see on the way home. I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but they ask those questions to build conversations within the home. And that's one of the partnerships that we connected within the community. But first and foremost, I think we have to remember that we have to invite them to the table. I don't think it would have been best practice if I would have just created something I thought was what they needed. No, we asked questions. What will help you? What's the best way to contact you, communicate with you? Everyone said text. So that's why we were like, okay, can you use this grant to send text messages every week, to help them engage? It holds them accountable. We provide the opportunity, and hopefully they take it and utilize it to its benefit, right? But we provide those opportunities. So that's something that I'm really trying to do, is first ask the questions, invite those stakeholders to the table, diversity in the stakeholders, so we can create plans that are equitable, that are inclusive, that are liberating, right? So that's something that I'm trying to do, that we're working to do.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's amazing. We have some questions from our attendees. So anyone can, any of our panelists can just jump in. So this one is, how does what does leadership look like in advocacy, such as working with legislators or governor's offices?
Sure, if you don't mind, I'll answer that. So it looks different, you know, from things that I've done myself in my previous. You're comfortable with what you know and how you feel about early childhood education, because that's what you're advocating for. And then going with what Dr. Boyd said, you have to have the data. Data is what you're going to use. Data helps you tell a story. And so if you have the data, will tell that story for you, and then you just back it up with that education, and there's that dinner plate. There's that 5-star dinner plate that they just can't refuse, you know. And so I know I use a lot of metaphors and analogies there, but that really is the best way that I can explain that, is just being comfortable with the knowledge that you bring as it relates to early childhood education, using the data. Data tells that story for you, and in combination with that and the research, you know, it just makes it a very difficult thing to turn away. And so.
And she said it's storytelling. That's what I heard. Like, tell your story. I think that's powerful, definitely. And your story can be told on social media, tagging politicians. Your story can be shared in letters. So don't think it's just one way. Show up as your authentic self and what works best for you.
Okay, we have another question from our attendees. How can we create mentorship in childcare?
That's a great question. How can, say the question one more time, please?
Yes, how to create mentorship in childcare, basically, was the question.
How to create, and so that question, perhaps they mean like a fundamental policy or system, perhaps, is what the question. I think I encourage them to create a team and let's make it happen. I'll join the team. I think it's very important, and it looks different in different areas, right? So a lot of times the Partnership for Children provides opportunities for mentorship. I know UNCG, that's where I received my master's. They had a program for teachers who were in classrooms, for teachers who had home-based childcare, and they would come out. It was a grant. I think they still have it. I can't remember the name of it. But perhaps maybe looking at what already exists in other places and then trying to write a grant to make it happen in your place, in your area. You're on mute, Dr. Boyd.
Thank you. I didn't realize I had done that. That's a great answer. I don't know if I have much more to add. I think one of the more useful, I think, effective models that's been used in teaching in general, right, is peer-to-peer mentoring. So having sort of a master or senior teacher who mentors other teachers. So that's something that can be replicated in childcare centers. Some of your more advanced teachers who've been there longer, who have experience, can serve as mentors for others. I think the important thing to think about asking a mentor, though, is, do we provide them the time and space to do that? So if you want a teacher to do that, think about how you're going to reduce some of their other responsibilities then, so they can take on the mentoring role and really support other teachers. So I think sometimes we only think about the mentees, but not the support the mentor may need to take on that kind of mentoring role. But pairing teachers with other teachers is one effective model that has been used.
And if I may, I just want to tag along and mention some things that Ms. Crosby and Dr. Boyd have said. Sometimes maybe your mentorship is happening outside of work. And maybe, don't be afraid. I know Ms. Crosby has advocated for that. Speak up and speak out, reach out if you're in school, maybe have a conversation with your professor and just ask, hey, how did you get to where you are today? What was your journey like? And I'm looking for a mentor. Don't be afraid if you go to a conference and though, the facilitator says, hey, if you have any questions, reach out to me. Reach out to that person and say, I really enjoyed your facilitation of that professional development. I really want to learn more. What did your journey look like? And so I just encourage you that maybe if you don't feel like you have a mentor right now, then just reach out and don't be afraid to speak up for yourself and advocate for yourself.
Thank you so much. I think that was our last question. Want to give a huge thank you to our panelists, Angielena Williams, Dr. Brian Boyd, and Margo Ford Crosby. I know I am very inspired and energized and have lots of things to think about and talk more about just from this last hour. So tremendous thanks to you all. Thank you to everyone who participated, and of course to the Maryland Early Childhood Leadership Program and and the Trust for Learning for supporting this webinar. Thank you so much for everybody's time today.
Nice meeting the other panelists.
Same here.
Yes, I'll definitely be in touch with both panelists. I have questions.
Good. Thank you, Rudy. Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.